What is going on, everybody? Aaron here, and welcome to another episode of the Young Musician's Guide podcast. Today we've got tuba bassist, music entrepreneur, music educator, guy who wears many hats, author. He's also got albums published. He's got online courses published. Bill Mueter, also known as Tuba Visionary. He's going to be on the podcast today. We're going to chat a little bit about just some of the things he's done and how like his world and the things he's done has kind of led to the other things he's done and led to the career that he has now, even though he got there unconventionally, or not the way that you might expect somebody to have gotten there. So we're going to do that, and we're going to have a nice conversation with him. But before we get into that, I do want to remind you, if you want the reaction podcast for this, just a reminder that we do have a Patreon, and the Patreon patrons get that included, and that is at any level. So if you want my reaction to the conversation that we have, that is on the podcast. And also a reminder that if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe, and then also like and leave a review on any of the other platforms that you might be watching this on. But anyway, that's enough ado. Let's jump into it. Here's the conversation I got to have with Bill Mueter. I tell you what, it is, you get made fun of, we, the bald of men, get made fun of for the haircut, but I have not had a hair bill. I have not had to go to a barber shop in like 6 years.
It's great, man.
Yeah. Do you do razor to head as well, or?
No, I mean I did years ago, but I can't do it. I can't do the razor. It's too close. So I just get the clippers and take off the attachment, and that's it. The beard is what takes the longest amount of time. But
do you
my wife
keep the beard, or?
Yeah, I gotta keep on it on a regular. My wife won't let me get rid of it because I look like Uncle Fester. So
I'll take the clippers and I'll go around my entire head like once a month, and then the rest every week I'll do just regular clippers.
Yeah.
So we were chatting a little bit about you talking about what you do with marching bands, and it's kind of, we're getting into the beginning of that year.
Yeah.
So, and you said you have clients and you're working on shows and stuff like that. Is that like, do you do like the full package? Like you write the music and the drill, or do you work with somebody to like compartmentalize those things, or how does that go?
I used to, and I realized I'm really terrible at some of it. I remember when I first started writing marching band stuff, I actually started in high school, and at the same time I started writing drill, and I remember writing it like I'd print out like drill sheets and I'd write it by hand, and it was awful. I did it for one school, and I have a very embarrassing story about that school, and I won't share the name, but it was awful. And they announced my name before the show, and the school was so bad, and I'm like, I'm never going to put anybody through that, or myself again. So I've decided to just stick with the music part of it, because there's people that do drill way better than I do, and I just don't have that brain for it. So in terms of marching band design, I'm usually the first contact in terms of design, music design. So I work with two different percussion writers, and it's different depending on what school I'm working for. I have my person that I usually prefer to work with, Drew Tucker, but I work with different people depending on the school. So usually I'll start the music and I'll write a full wind score, and I'll write percussion cues, I guess. So there may be parts where the winds aren't playing the whole time, and I try to keep a thorough line throughout the music. So I'll write all the wind parts, and then percussion cues. I usually write a couple of synth parts, and then I do like the actual music design part of it, which, in modern marching band, there's sound samples, there's voiceovers, there's things like that. So I kind of take the lead on developing the sonic landscape and soundscapes for the show, just to kind of give it a little bit more polished end to it. So yeah, I write the wind book, and then I always pawn off the percussion onto someone else. And if it's a small group, sometimes I'll write percussion parts. There's a school I work for in the Keys that we kind of do a little bit of everything. And I actually work with Drew there as well, but we kind of just switch out responsibilities, because I used to be I actually started in percussion years and years ago. That was my first instrument, but there's people that write it better than I do. So I stick with the wind stuff, and and then kind of pawn it off onto somebody else when I'm done.
Yeah, that's probably nice too, because like, so I do the opposite. I write drill. Because I'm
Ooh,
the other
yeah,
brain. I can visualize it, but I am deaf, my
yeah,
guy. Man, I am
yeah,
so deaf. And like with drill, it's such a communication game with them,
yeah.
and you have
Hmm.
to be on the entire season. It's not like here's the win book and I'm done with you. You
Right.
know, they adjust, and so many people like they'll have a number at band camp and they'll change that number first day of classes. People will drop, people will come in, and then with percussion too, I would imagine that a lot of people like to use like their guy a lot of the
Right.
time if they have a percussion
Exactly.
dude.
Yeah.
And so like, were you? So you were in one of my favorite things I think to have ever existed, and I think that needs a revival of sorts. You were in Blast. And
Hmm.
did you do DCI as well before that, or like is that how did you get into like the marching arts and the way that you are now?
So I started drum corps when I was 15, and I did that for 5 years in the Boston Crusaders. And at that same time, I started in high school. I was 15, and then I went to USF. And while I was at USF, I met a friend of mine, who I think I already met before. His name's David Torres. So we marched drum corps together, and we also went to USF together at the same time. And then, we kind of went on with our separate lives, and I was doing a different array of jobs and stuff like that. And then David calls me one day. He's like, "Hey man, there's this job in Japan and they're doing a Japanese tour of Blast. There's one tuba opening. Would you be interested?" I'm like, yeah. I was like 20 years old, 21 years old. Of course I want to go to Japan for months. Yeah, that'd be awesome. So I literally stopped everything I was doing, and I drove down back to South Florida where my parents live, where I live now, and recorded an audition tape. I spent like all weekend just doing an audition tape. And I was playing a little bit at the time, but I wasn't heavy. I was just doing like bar gigs around Ybor City and stuff with the tuba and not making any money. So I was kind of rusty. And I remember I sent the audition tape, and the guy called me like 2 days later. He's like, you haven't been playing much lately, have you? I said, "No, I'm sorry. You could tell that." And he's like, "But I could see the potential." And he offered me a spot. He's like, "Go get your passport." And I basically had like a week to go get the passport expedited. And then they flew me up to Indiana for like a month for rehearsal. And then I was off to Japan. And then I did that show for 5 years. We did a Japan tour, did South Korea, did the World's Fair in South Korea. Um, we did a couple US tours. We did a thing in Six Flags, Fiesta, Texas. We did a residency there for a summer, which is real interesting. And the show still kind of exists right now. We just don't hear about it because it's in Japan. I mean, last I knew, Blast was the #1 grossing Broadway show that's ever been to Japan. And I think that's because there's no real spoken word in the show. So there's nothing that you have to translate or whatever. It's just music performed on stage, kind of like, the musicians come out of the orchestra pit and dance and play and march around and stuff. So it's very popular over there, where it was popular here more in the early 2000s and such. There hasn't been a US tour since I stopped in 2012. But they did a Disney version of Blast in Japan, I believe, last summer, and there's still plans to do more there in the future. We just don't hear about it as it doesn't travel as much in the States anymore.
Man, that's awesome. I didn't know. Yeah, it's like it's so crazy to me because like when I was coming up, I would have been doing my first year marching band was 2003, and like Blast, like that Broadway Blast, that PBS production or whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
videotape that they had. That was like if my band director was like just didn't want to do anything that day, that was the tape that they played.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and like
exactly.
I teach kids now who have never seen it. They have no idea what it is, and like it's lost on them. And but you watch like there's a lot of like stage marching art stuff in Japan.
Yeah.
Was that already going? Do you think that was already going on, or was that influenced by the stuff that you guys were doing there?
I mean, yes and no. Japan's activity is all based inside and indoors. So I think the indoor aspect of it is years ahead of the US and in terms of like indoor wins and stuff. So I think they kind of already had the leg up with that. But Blast definitely made a mark there. There's been a different spin-off shows. There was an all-female version it wasn't by Blast, it was a different creators that was actually created here in the US and brought to Japan with some friends of mine. And there's different spin-off shows, and they just treat arts differently in Japan. There's a different emphasis on arts where, you know, a good friend of mine, Naoki Ishikawa, he's a snare drum soloist in the show. And my roommate on my first tour, he's like famous in Japan for playing snare drum, marching snare drum. He doesn't play drum set. I mean, I'm sure he could play. He doesn't do all these other things, just literally playing marching snare drum. And he's like on the Today Show there. He does all this stuff and famous doing that, which you don't see that kind of thing here in the States. You don't see that same level of support. So it is really interesting, just seeing how the audience takes it over there. So I guess to answer your question, you know, there's definitely a lot of spin-off things. I think probably influenced by the show, but you know, they bring their own little spin to it. They're really, really cool. And I mean, I met some amazing musicians over there. We used to do clinics, and they would say like, all right, you know, perform or whatever. And we do something and we hear these kids perform. Like, you guys are way better than me. Like, why am I doing a clinic over here? It was super intimidating. There's so much talent over there, but I miss it, man. It was definitely a great experience, and I love the culture there, and, you know, hope to get back sometime soon in the future.
That leads me to this thing here. So
Yeah.
Topless in Tokyo. So the book that you wrote here,
Mm-hmm.
can you, all right, so where's the title? I know, but where's the title from? You know, what is this book all entailing? Because this is a project. Like, it's not just like you probably could have got a doctorate out of this thing, man. Like, so you want to chat about this a little bit?
Sure. So there's two ends of it. There's the business side of it, and there's the story side. I'll start with the business side because that's more professional. You know, right now, nobody has CDs anymore. I wanted to release an album. I wanted to put more music out, and we're in like a weird time where I don't have a CD player in my car. My computer doesn't have a CD player. If someone hands me a demo CD, I literally have no place to play it. So, you know, my last album I released, I bought like 1,000 CDs, and I'm still holding on to inventory just sitting in my garage right now. And I'm like, I give them away to students or whatever, just for fun. And I didn't want to deal with that again. And most of my sales pick up more traction online. So anyways, I'm trying to figure out a creative way to release music, but give more to it. And the thing that I've realized, you know, when you're playing shows, the thing that really relates to most people is stories. You know, I've played Carnival of Venice at a show for a general audience. It's not a recital audience, and you know, you think it would normally just like go when I'm playing like hip hop music, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna play this song Carnival of Venice, and it seems crazy, but I told this story about how I was younger and I was a band nerd, but I loved hip hop at the same time. So I'm gonna play Carnival of Venice like how I hear it as a hip hop, you know, person and whatever. And they loved it because they had a story behind it. So I realized, you know, then kind of the power of being able to tell a story and how important that is. So when that book came around, the idea for that, the basis is I've already written a book before. I know how to do that. To me, it's pretty simple. I've done that process, so I don't have to re-educate myself on doing that. And that's kind of the leg up I had on a lot of musicians, is that I've published a book before, and it's done decent. So I decided to, you know, write music that had a story. Every song has to have a story, and that's essentially what Topless in Tokyo is. It's a collection of short stories. And then it's all things that are true that I've experienced through tours. And the title Topless in Tokyo comes from a story where I was in Tokyo, and it's kind of a long, crazy story. But yeah, it's nothing too bad there. It's not what you think it is. Some people see Topless in Tokyo, you're like, oh, this book is inappropriate. It's not. I mean, there's some interesting stories in there, and it was interesting having like my mother-in-law read it for the first time. But it's funny to me and to most people because I'm a tuba player, and you think a tuba player kind of lives a boring life, but I've been able to travel all around the world doing this thing, and I've experienced a lot of crazy stuff. I remember going to Haiti and getting held at gunpoint in the first like 8 minutes I was there, and I thought I was hostage. And then I went to Japan. I had this crazy story there, and where I pretty much died on an airplane going to Japan, which is a true story. They paddled me back to life and everything. And that's where the Topless in Tokyo story kind of comes out of. So, and then I played this gig with Ariana Grande when she was like a teenager and young, and there's all these like crazy things that are in that book. It kind of tell the story of it, and the idea is that the music is, you know, could go with the book or go without the book, but it's kind of complementary, and it tells that story. So from a business end, I really wanted to be able to give a product that, you know, was music, but also gave something else, and kind of, it's essentially like a big liner notes. And then from, you know, from the other side of it, it's nice to be able to tell the story. A lot of times, you know, people don't read liner notes because they don't exist in digital format as much. You know, you listen to music on Spotify, and I'm guilty of that, and you don't know what the story is behind all the songs. And I wanted to make that readily available and make it known that like each song was written from a story rather than the opposite, if that makes sense.
No, dude, absolutely. Like I put out my album last year, and then ITEA wanted to review it, and they were like, "Yeah, do you have liner notes?" And I was like, "I will in like 2 days," because no one had asked for that until they reviewed it, and then they wanted the liner notes to, you know more about what they're talking about, and like it wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even a thing that crossed my mind to all that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And it's literally why I still buy records nowadays. Like I recently invested in all that equipment just so I could go back and buy some of my favorite albums from like coming up and stuff, and read up and see those things and appreciate the art a little bit more. And like, it's such a cool idea. And like, you know, I from a, you know, if I was like a, you know, book burning Karen mom, I might think that Topless in Tokyo was going to be something bad. But I just think first off, you know, the T&T is just great. And then, but also like, I knew what this book was before I purchased it. Like it has it's such a iconic title and such an iconic project, and so creative, especially in the Tuba world where things can be sterile, you know, and just be flat and plain. And that's kind of like your thing, man. Like you have like the videos on YouTube about like buzzing and how to go about that kind of a thing. But you also like have a lot of stuff where it's like, you know, tuba loop covers of pop songs, but also you play bass and you play drum set and you do all these sorts of things. Have you always been into, like, we'll say the more pop side of things in your tuba education, or did you get into it later in life?
No, I mean, to be honest, for years as a tuba player, I was kind of lost and didn't really have a strong direction, because I guess when I was in high school, I was told that if you were a good musician and you want to do music for a living, you go to school for music performance. If you're not a good musician, you go to school for music education, because that's where the players that go that aren't so good, which is a terrible mentality, because you get these band directors that weren't good musicians that don't make great band directors, and vice versa. You need a great musician to make a great educator and all that stuff. And then within that, I was told as a tuba player, if you want to have a career in music, you have to do classical music. And I love classical music, but I realized early on that I would never compete with a lot of there's so many great players out there in euphonium and tuba world. And it just felt like a big competition to me. Literally, you know, there's competitions out there and I could play, but I knew I would never be like that level of a player. Nor was I honestly interested. I like, you know, I want to be able to just do what I do and have fun. So that kind of left me in a rut for a few years. And going into Blast, I didn't really have to have an identity in Blast. I did that for 5 years. It paid my bills. I toured around. So during that time, it didn't really matter. And I wrote my first book and I was like, cool, I did an educational thing or whatever. And then getting out of that, that's where I really kind of hit a lull. And like, I had to decide who I wanted to be as an artist. And then again, now I've done this show where I've played the same music hundreds and hundreds of times, where I felt like my skills almost diminished a little bit because I had like show chops. I didn't have like, I couldn't do anything else really that great. So I really had a moment or a couple of years where I had to figure out what I wanted to do. So I decided to go way left field. I did an album called Off Script, and I almost did it just to go completely different. Like I used all these different effects and I did all these pedals and stuff just the sake to be different, but I didn't quite love it, to be honest with you, because I didn't have any direction with it. And I remember I did an ITEA conference up in Illinois. This was like when I was fresh out of Blast. I did a tuba conference up there, and it felt so awkward. I went up there and I did all this crazy tuba stuff, and I just really didn't feel comfortable in my skin, because I was just trying to do something different, just to be like, look at me, I'm different. I'm not doing what everybody else is doing, because I can't do that, quite honestly. And I was at a conference with tuba players that were better than me. I'm playing, classical lit, and I was with all these people with more experience. And I remember giving a clinic on music entrepreneurship, and I had like no money in my bank account. I'm like, what am I doing right now? This doesn't make any sense. And then I started doing some shows with a friend of mine, Drew Tucker. And at that time, we started this project called The New Standard, which is the idea is that we're playing standards of my generation, stuff I grew up with, Tears for Fears, Prince, Michael Jackson, these artists that I like, that I listen to. And we started doing our own covers along that. And I started to realize that the general audience outside of academia, you don't have to be a master of you don't have to be a master of your instrument to be able to be successful. You just have to be confident. You have to be relatable. The audience wants to be able to hear and see themselves through your music. And there's a whole different set of guidelines that come out of that recital idea, which is what I was originally in, versus, playing for an audience and how to sell for an audience. And that completely changed my outlook. And it was like at that point where I stopped caring what everybody else thinks. I stopped caring what other musicians think about me. It's not that I don't have feelings, and I care what people think about me, but, musicians are the first people to ask you for free comp tickets to a show. If you're trying to sell tickets, you're trying to do work, you got to appeal to the general audience. So that's when I just made a decision to play the stuff that I love. So people now kind of look at it like, man, why do you do this different stuff? And honestly, I wouldn't see it any other way, because that's the stuff I love doing. And I'll still take the occasional classical gig, or, a big band thing, or jazz. And I love jazz, but it's usually just me playing the type of music that I love. And because I'm honest with that and sincere, I feel like that is what is able to sell out a show and build out audiences and stuff. So long story long, now it feels natural to me because I'm playing the stuff that I like. But it was kind of a tough road getting there to realize that lesson, that, this is the only way. And for some people that may be classical music, some people that may be jazz, it could be anything. It could be bluegrass. But for me, it meant like pop music and rock. I love pop music. I love rock music of certain generations. And that's what I want to play. So that's, that kind of feeds the Instagram and feeds the things that I'm doing. And I think it is powerful in the sense that people are like, oh, this guy doesn't care. He's just going to play what he wants. And I try to make my best to sound presentable to every audience and not just tuba players. And that was a mistake that I think I made early on, was like, oh, I want it to be cool for tuba players. I want it to be cool for musicians. But I've kind of scrapped that, where I want it to be, relatable to the general audience. And it just happens to be tuba, and that has a story in of itself.
Yes, it is crazy how, like, especially when you're in like undergrad specifically, like you get into your studio and you're playing like the stuff like the Bordeaux's and the like Vaughan Williams tuba concertos and all that kind of thing, and like you feel like that, like that's the only thing that you do on those instruments. And then you get out into the professional world and like it's not that, man. Like it's just, yeah. And it's crazy too, because a lot of the people who like were at that ITEA conference and stuff like that probably see the stuff that you're up to nowadays, and they're like, oh man, that's so cool. That's not what I'm doing, but that's so cool. And like the real players, and so that leads me to, I wanted to chat with you a little bit about, so you just got off of launching the Modern Tuba online course. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of teaching a lot of those skills and those abilities. I mean, you even on your website, I think you call it like the brass player, or the bass players course for brass players. Yeah. Kind of a thing. So what brought that project up?
There was a lot of stuff that I think I wish I knew early on. And I'm thankful maybe that I didn't know it. In hindsight, I am where I am because of the path that I traveled, but there was a lot of stuff that I wish people told me. And I realized that as a tuba player, your education is largely based around classical literature, which is cool, but it wasn't the path for me. And I've realized that I get more gigs, I get phone calls for people wanting me to play in a Dixieland band or wanting me to play in a New Orleans style thing. I get more gigs in South Florida for people who want like a New Orleans funeral. Sounds terrible, but you have to be able to play tuba in a certain style in that jazz and that kind of big band setting. And there's this completely different skill set that's required to be able to do that. So I wanted to be able to formally offer that to students and the things that I didn't learn. And I have the, you know, I started as a bass player as well in high school. And I think that helped bridge the gap for me, getting a lot of the gigs that I did over the years. Cause I'd show up and get hired as a bass player, but I bring the tuba and I'd be like, yo, check it out. It's going to be cool. Trust me. It's going to sound, you won't notice a difference. I'll make it sound the same. And that's literally how I got initially my tuba gigs, because I'd sneak in the tuba and I would play it and I'd have it all EQ'd so they couldn't hear the difference. And I would, like, they'd turn around and it's a tuba and they're like, whoa, what is that? And the audience would go nuts because it sounded the same, sounded like something new, but it was something different. So, you know, being a bass player allowed me the training of learning how to create bass lines, learning how to groove, learning how to lock in with a drummer and hit with a kick drum and all these different things. So I wanted to be able to offer that type of education to students that haven't had that training, just like myself when I was in high school. I didn't have that. So, you know, we talk about a lot of it's based around jazz literature, because through jazz literature, you can learn a lot of stuff. Everything is, jazz is based in the blues, and everything else in US music really since that has been grown out of that. So that's what we talk about. We talk about blues. We go through all different forms of blues. We talk about techniques, how to build a bass line, starting from the root, leading tones, different things like that. We talk about improvisation a little bit. We talk about tone. Tone is a really big thing when you kind of switch over. You know, you think about having a certain tone quality, you know, but as a bass player, you want to sound like a bass player. So there's different types of articulations that we talk about within the course that helps you sound like a bass player. So I have a bass articulations chapter where we kind of break that up and different things. And, you know, my goal was to look at it from a bass player's point of view. So like I said, it's a bass player's course for brass players. None of the information out there is, in my opinion, from a technical standpoint, is life-changing. It's stuff that's been out there, but nobody's formulated that to fit for a brass player. Nobody showed tuba players like, hey, this is how you get a pitch staccato articulation and mimic that in a palm muting technique on a bass. When you play reggae, you play with a palm mute. How do you get that same sound and articulation on tuba? There's no formal information for that out there. So that's why I wanted to take all that stuff I've learned as a bassist and be like, all right, this is how you do it in tuba. And it's been really cool, man. I've gotten such great feedback from it. People really like it. And what the neat thing is, it's a self-led course. And I like that kind of thing. You can work at your own pace. You could take a year to complete it. You can do it. If you're eager, you could probably do it in a week, but it's meant to be a 4-week course. And, yeah, the modern tuba, and it's still out there, still getting people signed up. And it's, to me, that's like the future for me right now, is doing more of those type of things. I have 3 more courses queued up that I'm working on right now as we speak that are going to kind of complement that. One from a business standpoint, I got a business course coming out, and I have an improvisation for classical musicians course coming out that I'm really excited about. And that's in the next like 2 years. It's a big work in the making, but it's fun, man. I love doing that kind of stuff. And the silver lining of this whole, you know, COVID situation that we're in right now, you know, as we're recording this podcast, it's afforded me some extra time to actually sit down and finish that, which was originally going to be a book. Sorry, I can ramble on, but the course was actually going to be a book originally. And that was my goal. I was like, I can write another book. I've done it. I know how to do it. It's easy. And then my friend Drew Tucker was like, dude, you got to do something different. And I was talking to some of the guys over at Jazz Memes, and they've kind of rolled out some online educational stuff. And I've you know, messed with that in the past, but I didn't want to be tied to like a subscription thing where I had to be on there every day. I just want to create content and move on to the next thing and keep it going, like, because that's what works best for me. So that's kind of where the course was born out of that need to. I wanted to create another book, but I wanted it to be something that I can always update. Because here's the thing I learned, man. When you write a book, that's it. The book exists. And 10 years from now, you look back at that book and you realize, well, I don't believe that anymore. Well, you know, used to think about the way I used to think about buzzing and breathing when I was 20 years old is different than I think about it now. And that's just because you grow over time and you get different perspectives and stuff. And it doesn't mean I was wrong then, but I don't, there's a better way to think about it. So a lot of my old educational stuff that I look at from years ago, it just seems dated. And I never want to feel dated. And I hate that feeling about you write something and if that's it, it's out there. And you could release multiple editions and stuff, but there's a first edition of my first book, which I don't even sell anymore because I've since revamped it. But every once in a while, it'll creep up on me. I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. If anybody's got that first edition, let me know. And I'll send you the second edition because it's scary. But that's why I love the online thing. And through online, I can offer videos, play along tracks, all sorts of stuff that is way harder to do in a book setting.
And you, so you did, because if I remember correctly, you contacted me because I gave you a little blurb for that thing, for that course, but you contacted me, months ago. It wasn't like COVID hit and you were like, okay, what project can I do, right? You were already working on this and COVID kind of happened, right?
Yeah, it was already in the works. Realistically, it was probably like a 6-month process.
Yeah.
And I probably was serious about it for 2 months. The material, I took about 6 months to actually write it. Because again, it was originally a book. So my goal was to format it as a book. And then I probably spent a month figuring out how I would lay it out. I think the next one will go a lot quicker because most of the time I spent just literally trying to figure out, all right, how do I have someone sign up for this and this payment goes through the website and then this goes to this and they immediately get it. That stuff, man, once you get into that, you got to learn those things as a musician because to pay someone else to do it is just a waste of money. But that stuff, it takes time to learn. I probably spent a month just figuring out how I want to do it because what I didn't want to do is format the whole course and realize, oh, I can't do it that way. I got to do it this way. Yeah. So I wanted to figure out exactly how I wanted to do it first. And then I formatted all the material on the website. So that the actual recording of the videos and all that stuff, that I can fly through that now that I have the format. But yeah, I mean, it's been in the process for a while, and my hopes is that I can start to turn content around quicker. Right now, it takes me a pretty good amount of time. And like marching band shows, when I first started writing, it would take me forever, and I've been able to get more efficient. And it doesn't mean my writing's getting worse. I'm just getting more efficient with my process, and that's what I'm kind of hoping to do with the next go around. Right now, I'm kind of working on the next course, but I'm still deep into marching band writing for about 3 more schools that I have to finish up. But then once that's done, it's game on. So we'll see something coming soon, hopefully in the works. But yeah, like you said, I was working on it before COVID, but the open space definitely allowed me the opportunity to kind of fast track it and finish it.
I was thinking of it too, because I was like, man, it kind of hit, it was a project that you were working on and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure it helped you fast track it a little bit or gave you at least some extra time to work on it. But like, man, for me as an artist and a teacher, those materials came out at a perfect time because it was digital. Like I didn't have to go and purchase it somewhere or something like that. Like it was there. It's always available. Like I just have to go to billmeter.net and log into my member. Yeah. But like as an artist too, it gave me something to work on because like my gigs are gone. Like my playing engagements were gone, right? Almost wholeheartedly. And then it was this weird thing of like, oh man, all these things that I've been practicing on forever were gone. And then your thing came out, and then like, and I'm sure you've gotten this too. Like everybody wants you to be a part of their virtual ensemble all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And so like I started recording a lot of music for free to help a lot of people out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, it kind of came out at a really interesting and good time because it gave us a lot of stuff to do. I haven't worked through the course yet because I have a plan for it. I actually have a very specific plan for it.
Oh, cool.
But I've poked through all of it and I'm like, oh man, this is stuff that, I'm so excited about because man, like the extent of what I've done, like all of my jazz education has been on guitar.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And then playing trombone and big band, and I can read and stuff like that, but it's weird, man. Like I have not been able to, like you have, like I learned a lot of jazz guitar and I played through all that stuff and did all that stuff before I got to USF. When I was at community college, you can double because it's so much smaller. Right. They let you do that stuff. So I was playing bass trombone in one jazz band and then playing guitar in another jazz band. And then like the trombone stuff, I would read it, but I was never a soloist, right? Like I never picked up and like I never improv'd or any of that kind of stuff. I just read the lit that they gave in front of me and all that sort of thing. And then like, but with guitar, I could do all that sort of a thing. And I've never been able to like translate it from one to the other. And so I'm actually stupid excited about going through this course because I feel like I have that knowledge and it's like in the recesses of my brain.
Yeah.
But like doing a course like yours for my like vanilla self will help me to be able to like translate that stuff, man.
It's tough, man. You know, coming from a lot of people have an advantage that we don't have, being like guitar is a visual instrument, bass is a visual instrument, piano is visual. We have 3 or 4 buttons, maybe another if you're playing a transposing instrument. But you know, we only have a handful of buttons that we can use, and it's just there's no realistic patterns. Where guitar, I remember when I was in jazz band in high school, and they would have like a minor scale test, and I would burn, man. Upper fret, same pattern, upper fret, same pattern, and I would burn through my scales, and nobody knew that it was one pattern for every minor scale, one pattern for every major scale. So I became the king of that. And then, you know, figuring out how to transfer that to brass instrument. Honestly, the biggest thing, and most of my education has come from playing out and playing with musicians that are way better than me. But I think a lot of almost the downside of a lot of classical musicians is we're trained to really, you know, look at our playing and analyze our playing. And we almost get in our heads too much about it, where, you know, when you're improvising, when you're playing jazz, you almost need to take a step back and let your voice be the last thing that you're focusing on, and focus on how you can have this musical conversation. Like we're talking right now. I'm talking, you stop talking, you start talking, I stop talking. The simple things of that's like the stuff that, you know, we really have to focus on with jazz, because I look at it more as a language and a conversation. And yeah, there's technical things that happen, but if you know all your 12 major scales, you can improvise in any key. You also know all your 12 minor scales. And most band kids by their senior of high school hopefully knows all their 12 major scales. So you already have the tools that you need. There's only 12 notes, you know, from the beginning of time. There's 12 notes, and it's just what you do with those notes that, you know, make a difference. And that has to do with, you know, the life that you live and your day-to-day stuff. And you can only speak for, you know, you can only play for who you are. So, you know, I think that's the big thing. And that's my next course is really building on that kind of a small section that I put in improvisation for tuba players, but really making it for all classical musicians, because I had to learn as a classical musician how to improvise. And I've made so many awful mistakes. I have so many videos of shows where I sounded terrible, man, early on, because I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do. And then the bad thing is, as a tuba player, they treat you like a bassist. So if you're a trumpet player blowing over a song, you're playing, you're burning, the whole band's going, then the bass takes a solo and everybody goes, they go, you know, side cymbal, they close it, they get real quiet. So you're the most exposed solo. And man, that used to give me stress like nothing else. So I feel like I almost need to speak on that topic on what it's like for classical musicians like coming over, because I've been through that struggle, and I've been through that heartbreak many, many times.
Dude, I love seeing videos. A lot of times there are videos that you happen to be in, but they're not like your videos. Like they're just like bands that you're playing with or whatever. And like almost every single time you take a solo, it's so crazy how hyped the crowd gets, because they just don't expect it. Like you've been kind of in the background playing bass, and then you pick up a tuba for a song, and then you like rip out a solo, and no one expects it. Yes. And they're like, "Oh, dude, the tuba guy is like tearing it up, man." And it's so crazy how hyped the crowd gets. And it's so cool. It's so cool to see that, you know, thinking that, you know, living in a world where like tuba is Gene Picorni and nothing else. And it's so cool, man, to see it.
Here's a secret, man, between us and all the listeners. As a tuba player playing for a general audience, the bar is set so low, because most people, I hate to say this, and I'm not putting down anybody else, but the general audience doesn't know really kind of what a tuba sounds like or what it can do. They just, you know, they may be familiar with it, but they just don't know. So you can literally go out there and do anything. And if you put showmanship behind it and you own it, they will love it. Like I'll go out there, man. I watched, same thing with bass guitar. I watched Bob Marley's band. I watched the Wailers. They came into town, and the original bass player, Family Man, they had him take a solo, and he took like a 5-minute solo, and it was on Waiting in Vain. So the bass line to Waiting in Vain, boom, 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 beam, ba doo 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 doo. That's the bass line for like the whole song. Literally, that was his entire solo. Didn't do anything else. Just walked up and played it, but it felt so good. And the audience was like, yeah, yeah. And after I saw that, I was like, man, I try way too hard sometimes. But you know, that's kind of the funny thing. And I always joke, people will say, oh man, that was amazing tuba solo. I was like, yeah, you just don't know what it's supposed to. It's like the bar is so low for tuba players, where if you're a guitar player, man, people expect you to go out there burning and be able to shed and all this stuff. And as a sax player, but tuba players, we almost have it easier in that thing. So it kind of gives us a leg up, that the fact that the general audience really doesn't know what to expect when they hear a tuba on stage, nevertheless be like the spotlight of a solo in front of an ensemble.
Yeah, it's always a joke when I'm playing trombone in a big band or something like that, and then the sax plays a solo. And it's always a joke that like saxophone players are playing like they're getting paid by the note.
Oh yeah,
they're just ripping through them all, man. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Just all right. So we both went to USF, but we went at different times, and it just is happenstance because like I know you for Tuba Visionary and all that kind of stuff. I had no idea until my fiance, who you went to school with, told me that she knew you. I had no idea that you and I went through the same school. So were you weren't there? Were you there when Jay was there? Like, was he your teacher as well?
Yeah. So here's my failed college story. Your fiance was my drum major in the Herd of Thunder marching band. That's how I knew her. And it was funny when I haven't seen her for years, and I followed you on social media and stuff. I was like, she looks really familiar. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I just realized like the whole circle's kind of come together. But I went to school. I went to USF probably about a year. Jay was there. I wasn't really studying exclusively with Jay. I was like a young, unfocused kid that kind of was like, not going to class, and that was before I did blast. It was before I was really anything. And honestly, at the same time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I was into music, and I was selling cars, and I sold life insurance. I worked at CarMax in Clearwater at the same time, and I was making decent money there. I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this tuba thing? And that's, I was probably at the end of my first year at USF when I got the call to go do blast, and I picked up and left. And I remember it was kind of a rough situation because I was on a full scholarship there, and I kind of blew it all to go take this tour. And if I had to go back over again, I probably, part of me would have finished when I was there, and part of me was like, well, I got all these different opportunities that I normally wouldn't get. So my situation and my scenario is not the norm. And because of that, I always have students like, oh, you never finished college, you didn't do that. And I said, yeah, but I've had to deal with so much more heartache and difficult things than if you had that degree and you had that piece of paper.
Oh, so you don't have one at all?
No.
But and you've still been able to make a career playing.
Mm-hmm. And because that's the funny thing. I'm in like a weird area where I get a lot of credit for experience, and I've gotten hired at many universities to do master classes and all over the place, where when I left college, I was told by a certain individual that's no longer at USF that I would never work in the music industry if it had anything to do with it. And it was like someone I really looked up to, and I've literally spent the rest of my time trying to prove that person wrong. And since then, that person has asked me to go give a master class at a certain university that they work at now, which is kind of funny to me. But, again, my situation is definitely not the norm. I mean, it is for a lot of jazz musicians that go to school up in New York and then they get a gig and then they're off and that's it. So I kind of took that route of more that jazz musician. I went to school and then I got the gig, but honestly, I wasn't really, Jay was there and I was kind of taking that for granted. I wasn't really studying, and I was kind of like doing the college thing. I was in the Herd of Thunder marching band, and I was deep into drum corps. Honestly, those were like the only two things I cared about at the time, because it was fun and it was easy. So, but yeah, that was my failed college experience, and I've had to work kind of double time to be able to build up credibility enough to get me hired to work at high schools, enough to get me hired to work at universities, and you gotta go through a different process than that. So there's good and bad things that have come from that.
So I probably have. So I mean, I was drum major for hot band too, but it was not as, I did other things in my musical career outside of that, and for Arupa, that was like her like shining
Yeah.
moment. Like she also like helped found so many things and all that kind of stuff. So we have a lot. We have nothing from my time in the Herd of Thunder in this house whatsoever, and a ton of stuff from her time. So I bet you I have photos of you somewhere in this in this house hanging up around somewhere.
I looked really good, man. I was in good shape. I was skinny. I had hair. Oh man. Yeah, I was
um
prime.
so before I let you go, I wanted to ask, you've taken such, for lack of a better phrase, like such an unusual path to do the things that you're doing, not the like path that like a lot of people would necessarily think to get, to get where you are. And so I'm really curious, like, what advice do you have for people who are kind of starting their musical journey or thinking about it as a profession? What advice would you have for people who are interested in doing the types of things that you're doing, and are just starting out?
So it's funny you mentioned this because I'm doing a master class later with Malachi. Did you do one a couple weeks ago with him?
I'm doing one later. So
Okay.
he's one of my former students.
Okay, cool. Yeah, man,
Yeah.
it's awesome. He's put this thing together, this platform. So it got me thinking about a couple things, and I started kind of mapping out what a typical career path is versus what my career path was. And again, like I said, mine's not the norm, but a big struggle that most tuba players and euphonium players or any musician has coming out of high school, going into college, is believing in yourself, one, and two, having your parents believe in yourself and believe in your path. Because as you go in and say, hey, mom and dad, I want to do music for a living, they say, oh, okay, sure. And they get scared because they think, oh, okay, what's their future going to look like? Whereas you become a doctor, you go to school for business, there's a set path and there's a set line of things. You go to school, you do, maybe grad school, you do training, you get a job, maybe you get a better job, and you have this idea of job security. Where to me, I have more job security now than most people in a traditional job. My dad for years worked for American Express, and he would always say, that you have way more job security than I do. And he was like up there at American Express. But, his point was if he got fired, that's it. He loses that job. That's his sole source of income. And I've realized that more now than ever. And I've been really blessed with everything going on. I did a pie chart for this masterclass where I actually took my income from 1 month and I showed all the different places where it came from. And I've never done that. I've never showed anybody any of that before. It's kind of revealing. And I got into it because I was in the middle of finishing up my taxes before the deadline on July 15th, getting that out. Thank goodness for that extension. But anyways, so I started looking at my income and I realized only 6% of my income comes from playing tuba on a regular basis. And then I also have writing. I have royalties. There were clinics. There's like 6 or 7 different revenue streams, and no one of them is overpowering. So if one of them drops out, it's like, okay, well, I have this other stuff. And I realized I have this client list of people that I've worked with that I started, I took the first Blast gig, and Blast was like a catalyst for me. And I used that to leverage other things. And I leveraged all this stuff, and it built this big web of people that can call me at any moment for a gig, as long as you hold up your bargain every time that you get hired. So I guess my advice for anybody coming up is you're going to feel like you're entering in a place in a realm of unknown. Like there is not a set career path, but that's not the truth. Look at people like Andrew Hitz, look at all these different people that are doing well and living a happy life. And they always say, I remember hearing this, like, you got to define what success means for you. And that's important, but it can also be dangerous if you do that too early on in your career, because my idea of success when I was 21 years old was going out partying, have a good time, and living in an apartment. My idea of success now is I want to be able to pay for my mortgage. I want to have health insurance. I want to pay my taxes. I want to have a car. I want to do all this while I enjoy doing the things that I love to do. So your goals change as you get older, but you're not entering in a career path that's not set out. And I encourage you to study successful musicians that you love, and don't just study their music, but study what they did. Study what got them to what you do, and build up an example of 10 different people, and you could see those routes of things that you can do, because there's so much in the music industry outside of just playing your instrument, and especially for tuba and euphonium players, because let's be honest, the demand is not strong for that instrument. But where some people say, there was this old parable about this shoe salesman goes to this foreign country where there's poverty and everything, and they didn't have anything, and he comes back and says the situation's terrible. You know, they don't have any money, they don't have anything, you can't sell any shoes there. And then another guy, shoe salesman, goes to the same place, and he comes back and he says the situation is great. He says they don't have any shoes, they don't have anything, there's a huge market for it. And that's what I see for tuba and euphonium. You know, it's not oversaturated like it is for guitar or trumpet or these more known instruments, which means there's a lot more opportunity out for us in modern music, in real music. So you may not see those career paths, you may not see that immediate opening, but it exists. And quite honestly, you're able to build a career that is potentially more diverse than most people. You know, if you're into writing, if you're into producing, you could do all these different things. You just have to allow yourself the time to build those skills and build that up, and that takes patience. I think I look back and I made a chart. The first 6 years of my career was purely based on skill acquisition and networking, and it wasn't money based. Yeah, I had enough to get by, but I wasn't getting rich by any means. But you have to allow yourself, and college is a great opportunity for that. College allows you to build those skills, but on top of that, you have to network. You have to build those networks of people that you can grow upon. And I think that's the biggest thing, man. Like, as a young musician, kind of ready to make that start, you know, if you're serious about doing this, there's a path. There's many paths, and you'll see that you can actually build a stable career and you know, do well for yourself. And, you know, where most people think it's impossible, I think it's almost easier for me because I play the tuba versus if I played guitar. I have a way easier path because I have way less people to compete with. And it's really not a competition. There's people that are doing similar things to me out there, but there's enough gigs for all of us. So, you know, don't get discouraged, especially in times right now. You know, right now there's, you know, as we record this, the COVID thing's going on. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. But now's the time where you can really just hone in on, you know, what's important to you, and you know, do what's important to you, and don't try to be anybody else. You can't be anybody else but yourself, and that's what you're going to be as successful as I mentioned earlier. When I really bombed at that clinic is because I was trying to be an idea of what I thought the tuba community wanted me to be, and it wasn't until I started being myself where the money came. And I wasn't focused on the money, but now I've kind of built a network where I'm okay. You know, I can have a house, I can have my mortgage to pay for all these things, and everything's cool. And that's my goal right now, man, is to, you know, enjoy time with my wife and be able to do the things that I love and with the people that I love. And that's, to me, the greatest gift. And that path exists, man. It's out there. And don't let anybody discourage you to say that you can't do those things.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on.
For sure.
Especially with you just have you're doing such cool stuff, and like everything looks cool, and like the aesthetic that you create and the art you create is so cool. So keep going at it, man, because like it's inspirational to me. And also, like, I always show your stuff to my kids, like always show your stuff to my kids, because like I like, especially like a sixth grader seeing the stuff you're doing and like seeing crowds react to a tuba solo like that, like, yeah, man, they get so stoked about it. So thank you so much for, you know, taking time out of your super busy schedule to hang out with me. I always ask the guests if they want to sign us off, if they have anything, like any catchphrase that they have that they want to say, or you can use the stock one that I have for you guys. So Bill, would you like to sign us off?
What am I supposed to say? I have no catch. I'm not that slick, man.
So what I normally do here is you just say your name and you say reminding you to be happy but never satisfied.
Okay, so I'm gonna say this first. Thank you, Aaron, for putting this together, because this resource is really, really cool for a lot of musicians. And the second that you told me about this, I started listening back to different podcasts. And the name of itself really kind of sums it up. And I think it's cool that, you know, and I appreciate your support. And the thing is, man, rising tide raises all ships. We're all in this thing together, and we got to build each other up as this community. So I have no fancy catchphrase, but I'm Bill Muter. This is the Young Musician's Guide. Is that correct? I keep wanting to call it the Young Person's Guide because I keep thinking of the orchestral song. But anyways, I appreciate you all listening to this. And yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Awesome, man. Cool.